Tonight, instead of stone walls or candlelit halls, we begin with something softer. A shape of sand, a single dune, resting under a sky that has not quite decided whether it is night or morning. It is said that just before dawn, the desert holds its breath. The wind falls quiet, as if every grain of dust is waiting for light. You find yourself gliding over that hush now, drifting slowly, as though some patient hand is guiding you higher, then lower, over a vast wavering sea of dunes. At first, all you see is repetition, curve after curve, soft crest folding into soft hollow, the occasional dry shrub, twisted into a shape that looks almost like a question. The stars above are thinning, but a few still cling to the upper sky, pale and stubborn. The horizon is only a suggestion, a faint grey line where sand and sky agree to pretend they are different things. Beneath you, the dunes seem anonymous, interchangeable, as if you could spin in any direction and see the same view forever. Then, on one gentle rise, something changes. The wind stirs, only a little, a small breath, like someone turning over in sleep. For just a heartbeat, the surface of one ridge shifts, and a shape appears beneath the skin of sand. A perfect, deliberate curve. Not a random swell, not a careless accident of wind. The ghost of an arch, its topmost edge describing the outline of a buried gate. Whispers tell us that some travelers have seen this curve in moonlight, when the dune is colder and the sand a little less eager to pretend it is empty. They say they have watched it appear, traced it with a fingertip on the surface, and then, by morning, found nothing but smooth ripples, as though the desert had politely erased the memory. You hover there now, above that single dune, as the sky grows a touch lighter. The curve slowly fades again, as the wind combs fresh lines across it. If you did not know it was there, you might never have noticed it. But now you have, and the apparent emptiness of the desert begins to feel less like absence and more like a veil drawn carefully over something that does not wish to be disturbed beneath the silence. A city waits. It is said that this city was not taken by fire or sacked by invading armies. No walls were shattered by rams. No towers fell in a blaze of screams. Instead, the people who lived here looked at their sky, listened to their earth, studied the behavior of water and wind, and understood that something was changing. That the land that had fed them for generations was becoming a little more fragile, a little more distant, year by subtle year. Rather than fight until every last stone was broken, they chose another way. You sink gently, as if the dune itself is exhaling, and slip down through soft layers of sand. The world above becomes muffled and distant. The light cools, as though filtered through milky glass. For a moment, there is only dust and a feeling of descent. Then the dust thins, and shapes emerge from the half-dark. Streets. They run straight and sure beneath you, like fine lines drawn with a steady hand. Long avenues stretch toward a horizon you can no longer see, each one aligned with some remembered point in the sky, where a certain star rises at midwinter, where the moon appears on the first night of a particular season, where the sun stands at its highest and lowest, where memory fades in words, it stays in stone. Courtyards open like quiet wells between houses, geometric pockets of space that once held shade and laughter. Some are ringed with low walls, their edges carved in spirals and starbursts. Others are framed by columns, simple and unadorned, their duty more practical than grand. Once, trees grew here, their roots reaching into channels that carried water cool as breath. Now, the trees are gone, but the channels remain like veins, empty yet faithful. You drift lower along one street, peering into doorways. Within, the rooms are intact and eerily undisturbed. Niches are carved into walls where lamps once burned with fragrant oil. Shelves, cut directly from stone, hold only a thick skin of dust where bundles of scrolls once rested. In one house, a low bench curves around an empty hearth. In another, a shallow base still bears a faint ring where water stood for many years. There are no bones here, no toppled statues, no smashed altars. It is as though the city set itself down carefully, like a book being closed, and then allowed the sand to turn its cover face down. Some believe that at the center of this place, there was a chamber with no throne, no idols, just a simple table made of one great slab of rock. Upon it were maps not of land, but of cycles. Circles within circles, spirals within spirals, arcs across which someone had marked the rising of tensions between distant kingdoms, the ebb and flow of trade, the slow darkening of wells as water retreated underground. In this room, it is said, those who guided the city would place their palms flat on the stone, feeling its coolness seep into their skin. They would listen to the quiet voices of those who watched the sky at night and the wind by day. They would note the movement of dunes at the edge of their territory, the increasing frequency of dust in the air, the way the light changed color during certain months. From these subtle shifts, a picture emerged, not of disaster, not of punishment, but of a long, slow turning. The desert was moving, not maliciously, not hungrily, just moving. The people could build higher walls, they could dig deeper wells, they could send soldiers out to defend their edges, or they could read the message written in sand and starlight and choose to respond with a different kind of strength. Whispers tell us that the decision took years, unrolling as slowly as a scroll being read by candlelight. Families were asked to carry their stories, their tools, their seeds, further toward places where the soil still held moisture and the winds were kinder. Not all left at once. Some clung longer, unwilling to abandon the streets where their grandparents' footsteps still echoed. But gradually, the city thinned, like a river branching into many smaller streams. Those who stayed behind did not stay to fight. They stayed to fold. You drift now across a wide square. Once markets were held here, their stalls set in long rows, cloth shades trembling in the heat. They traded in grain and oil, in leather and spices, in stories and songs. At dusk, lamps would be lit one by one. Small flames mirrored in the polished stones underfoot. Now, the lamps are gone, but the square remembers its own geometry. The paving stones, though dimmed, still hold their places. A faint mosaic of colored tile survives in one corner, depicting a spiral around a tiny star. It is here, perhaps, that they gathered on the last evening. Some carry this image, the sky bruised purple and gold, the air thick with dust that turned the sun into a dull red coin. The last inhabitants of the city stand in the square, facing outward, not looking up for rescue, not waiting for a miracle, but acknowledging the walls, the gates, the streets that had once held their days. Then, Without ceremonies grand enough to interest chroniclers in distant courts, they began the work of making their own absence gentle. Doors were closed from within and sealed. Wells were capped. Clean stones laid over them like lids. Wooden beams were removed where they might collapse. Roofs allowed to settle inward in a controlled, quiet fall. In some places, rooms were filled deliberately with clean sand, layer upon layer, making sure that centuries later, the weight of the desert would press evenly, not splintering, but cradling. The city made itself small, as if curling into sleep. Night after night, the dunes crept closer. What had been the outskirts became the middle. Streets that once rang with human steps became corridors for wind. Grains of sand slipped into every crack, smoothing edges, covering sharpness. Slowly, the city disappeared from sight, not in flames, but in a long, careful exhale. You rise once more, up through the layered stillness of buried rooms, into the thinning veil of dust, and emerge into dawn. The desert is brighter now. The first rim of the sun peeks over a distant ridge, casting long blue shadows. The dune that hides the gate looks no different from its neighbors. It wears the same ripples, casts the same curved shadow. Its secret is carried entirely in what lies beneath. A lone figure appears in the distance, a solitary dot moving across the pale sand. Perhaps a traveler, perhaps a herder, perhaps a wandering trader searching for a more obvious path. From here, they are small and anonymous. You watch as they walk along the side of the dune, their feet sinking slightly with each step. Each footprint presses down, just enough to leave a shallow mark on the surface. From the city's perspective below, it is as if someone is knocking very softly on its roof. The traveler does not know. How could they? To them, the desert is simply itself, a place of thirst and distance, of shimmering horizons and occasional oases, a place to be crossed, a place that offers stars at night and mirages by day. The idea that they might be walking over an entire sleeping world never crosses their mind. Where memory fades in our stories, it lingers underneath our feet. It is said that on rare nights, when the moon is full and hangs low, the sand on certain dunes cools in such a way that old angles briefly whisper through its surface. For a little while the wind draws lines that remember straightness, a faint corner, a suggestion of a wall, a hint of a gate. Then the temperature shifts, the sand loosens, and the pattern is gone. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in any louder way than this. The city below, aligned so carefully with stars, has become an echo, not a monument. It teaches nothing directly. It does not rise up in exposed pillars and carved facades to demand your awe. Instead, it lives now in a question. How many other places chose to sink quietly rather than shatter loudly? How many of the world's serene surfaces are, in truth, the lids of forgotten chambers? You drift higher, leaving the traveler to their path, the dune to its dreaming, the buried streets to their long, patient companionship with stone and time. Up here, the desert resumes its illusion of sameness. But you know better now. You have seen how thin the line can be between emptiness and hidden architecture, between dust and design. As your own eyes grow heavier and the edges of your waking world begin to blur, you might imagine your thoughts as grains of sand, settling slowly over the shapes of your day. Some will cover old memories, some will soften new ones. beneath them all, deeper patterns will persist, untouched, waiting. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some cities choose to survive as whispers. And somewhere, under a dune that looks like any other, streets still lie aligned with absent stars. Courtyards still hold the memory of water, and a single gate keeps its perfect buried curve. A secret arch in the quiet, steady heart of the sand. The desert is already awake when we arrive. The sun is low, sliding gently down the sky, and the light has turned the sand to soft gold. Heat still breathes off the ground, but it is no longer fierce. There is a weariness in it now, a kind of sigh. You move slowly over the landscape, close enough to see details. Thin brush, scratching its living lines into the dust. The hollow shapes of animal tracks wandering from one low shrub to another. Wind-etched ridges on every dune. It all seems rootless, like a surface without a story. Then, in a shallow basin between two swells of sand, your gaze catches on something that does not move, that does not ripple or blur. A single stone. It does not look important at first. Just a pale block protruding from the ground at an odd angle. Edges softened by years of sand and sun. Half buried, half exposed, as though the earth has not yet made up its mind whether to keep it or give it back to the sky. But as the light shifts, the stone's true nature begins to show. The top edge curves, just slightly. On its face beneath the dust, there is the ghost of a carving. A shallow line that bends in a perfect arc across the width of the stone. Under the right slant of sun, more lines emerge, faint as breath on glass. A pattern that once might have formed the crown of a grand arch. You realize you are not looking at a rock that grew here. You are looking at the highest point of a gate. Whispers tell us that long ago, travelers recognized it too. They passed by and saw the same curve, traced it with cautious fingers, felt the cold firmness beneath the sun-warmed dust. Some marked it on their own handmade maps as the broken arch, a small signpost in a land of shifting paths. Others avoided it entirely, sensing that this stone belonged to something larger, something that preferred not to be disturbed. You drift closer. Up close, the stone is more articulate. The carving that runs along its top is worn, but not erased. It is a band of repeating shapes, small spirals nested in the arms of larger star-like bursts. Between them are tiny vertical lines, like stylized drops of rain. Under the arc, the barest trace of an inscription remains. The tips of letters that once spoke a name, now lost to the grinding of dust. The gate, you are told, is buried 3 times. The first burial was simple, the desert's work. We sink back, in thought and in time, to the gate as it once stood. It rose from the earth in a proud, symmetrical arc, anchoring one end of a wide avenue that led toward the heart of a thriving city. On market days, the air around it hummed with the low buzz of voices, the creak of loaded carts, the soft clatter of pottery. Above its keystone, banners hung, catching the wind. Beneath its shadow, travelers crossed from the outside world into streets lined with shaded courtyards and cool stone rooms. The city did not boast tall towers. Its builders believed in breadth, not height. They preferred wide roads, deep wells, courtyards square and open to the sky. Their gate was not a fortress, but a threshold. A promise that beyond it lay a place where certain ways of living were honored. sharing water, watching stars, listening when the desert changed its tone. For a long time, the gate's life was steady. People passed beneath it at dawn and dusk, every day folding another thin layer of meaning into its stone. Then came the first burial, not from war or decree, but from wind. Seasons stretched. The river that once visited the city grew timid and wandered elsewhere. Crops failed more often. Sand that had kept a respectful distance began to creep closer, swirling into courtyards, piling against outer walls. The air tasted more of dust, less of damp earth. Slowly, fields turned to scrub, then to barren stretches. The city shrank inward, gathering itself around a smaller core where wells still held water. The outer neighborhoods thinned, then emptied. Houses near the gate stood with their doors open for a time, then with doors shut, then with no doors at all, only blackened holes. The gate watched it all, still standing, still waiting. The wind, patient as ever, began its quiet work. It poured sand against the gate's base, filling the joints between its stones. It sifted into the carvings, softening the edges of spirals and stars. It rose, grain by grain, until the bottom of the arch no longer framed a clear view of the city, but a narrowing band of pale dust. By the time the last families left, the gate's lower stones were knee-deep in sand. Soon after, they were waist-deep, then chest-high. At last, the arch that had once allowed caravans to pass beneath in full procession could no longer admit even a child. The city was no longer easily entered, and the gate, built to welcome, became instead a quiet monument to distance. This was the first burial, the slow, impartial work of the desert, drawing a soft veil over stone. We rise again to the present, to the lone protruding block you see now. It is all that remains above the surface of that once proud form. The rest lies beneath, intact but enveloped, its curve intact in the darkness. For most empires, that would have been enough. For this one, there was a second burial. The second burial was not of sand, but of story. Long after the city had folded into the dunes, when its people had scattered and taken root elsewhere, new rulers came to power in neighboring lands. They preferred clear lines and clear loyalties. They liked histories that began with themselves, or at least pointed toward them like arrows. The old city in the sand did not fit easily into those tales. It did not end in glorious defeat, or serve as a convenient warning. It did not die burning on a battlefield. It chose to step back quietly, to accept the desert's change as something to be met rather than resisted. That kind of ending is hard to control in speech. It gives people ideas about gentler kinds of strength. And so, gradually, the gate was buried in words. Maps stopped marking its city. Chronicles, as Bia, spoke of other places. Places that rose with drama and fell with noise. The empire that had listened to stars and wind, that had chosen to yield rather than break, became a faint footnote, then a rumor, then a blank space. Children grew up hearing stories of conquerors and fortresses, of miracles and sudden catastrophes, but not of gates that watched their own cities sleep. A decree was never inked in bold letters to erase this place. No scroll was burned in a public square. Instead, there was a quieter decision, to tell other stories more often, to let this one fall to the bottom of the jar, where dust and silence collect together, where memory fades. Another kind of forgetting begins. People crossed deserts and did not know they walked along roads, once carefully aligned with constellations. They passed the half-buried stone of the gate and saw only a curious rock on the way to more famous ruins. That was the gate's second burial, covered by the weight of chosen narratives, hidden beneath the smooth surface of sanctioned history. And then, as time always allows, there was a third. The third burial is the one that drifts over all old things. Forgetfulness that is not imposed from outside, but seeps gently from within. Generations past, those who might have remembered the city's name, or heard the last fragments of its songs, made their own lives in other places. Their children learnt new customs, new fears, new hopes. Their tongues shaped different words under different skies. The gate, meanwhile, continued to sleep under its dune. Seasons turned, stars walked their slow circuits. The city beneath settled a little more each year, stones finding their most comfortable positions, cracks filling, angles rounding under pressure. The old arch did not resent its burial. It simply adapted, letting sand bear more of its weight, letting darkness become its new element. In this third burial, there is no malice and no decree. It is simply the way all things sink, over enough time, into the deeper layers of the world. Even now, standing in your mind before that lonely protruding stone, you feel the weight of these three coverings: sand, story, forgetting. They lie over the gate like three veils, each one more transparent, if only you know how to look. The light changes again. The sun slides lower, setting the desert alight in soft shades of clay red and gold. Shadows lengthen, stretching like dark fingers across the dunes. The stone's carved arc glows for a moment in warm, slanting beams, then cools as the sun moves on. You pull back, rising once more into the wide air. The single block shrinks, then vanishes into the pattern of sand and rock. From this height, there is no way to tell where the gate lies. The dune that hides it is just one of many. It would be easy, from here, to believe that nothing particular rests beneath, and yet, the knowledge of it lingers in you like a stone in the pocket. You may never stand in that desert. You may never touch that half-buried curve or feel the roughness of its worn carvings beneath your palm. But the idea of it, a gate that once welcomed an entire world, now buried 3 times, battles somewhere behind your ribs. Perhaps, as you move through your own days, you will notice certain thresholds differently. A doorway in your city, worn smooth by uncounted passing feet. A simple arch in a forgotten courtyard. A path through a field that feels older than the buildings around it. Perhaps you will look at them and wonder what veils lie over them. What stories have been told, retold, or allowed to sink into silence. Some gates no longer open in stone. They open in thought. Night thickens over the desert. The last light drains from the sky, leaving a deep velvet blue. Stars return, first as shy pinpricks, then as a steady river of pale fire overhead. The dune that covers the gate turns silver in the moonlight, its surface cold and smooth. Below, in the dark, the buried arch holds its curve, unchanged. It does not ask to be uncovered. It does not demand to be restored. It simply continues to mark, in its quiet way, a passage between worlds, between the remembered and the forgotten, between the histories that roar and the one that whisper. Beneath the silence, it waits. Above it, the desert breathes. Around you, the night grows softer. And as your own thoughts drift like fine dust, settling slowly over the events of the day, you may feel a small unspoken kinship with that hidden stone. Oh, both of you wrapped in layers of story and forgetting. Both of you holding shapes that not everyone can see. Both of you learning gently how to rest beneath the surface. Some things are buried to be lost. Others are buried to be kept. The gate buried 3 times was, perhaps, never meant to be found by those who look only with their eyes. The sun is low, a dim ember hovering near the horizon. Its light has softened from harsh white to a gentle clay red and gold. The heat that ruled the day is loosening its grip. The air moves more slowly now, as if tired. Out beyond the last scattered shrubs, the land levels into a pale, open plain. No walls, no houses, no ruins rising like broken teeth. Only wells. They stand in a wide ring, each one a round opening edged with stone. Some are lined with carefully cut blocks, their rims smoothed by hands long gone. Others are rougher, patched with smaller stones where time has taken its tax. None of them hold water. They are dark throats, dry and silent, set at strange intervals, as if marking the points of a forgotten constellation. From above, they look like beads of a necklace laid upon the earth. From the ground, they feel like questions. You glide slowly among them, your view circling the ring. Some wells are half filled with drifting sand, their depth hidden. Others drop into shadow so complete that even the shrinking light of the sun cannot touch the bottom. A few have stones, lodged partway down, tumbled from their own rims. No ropes hang. No buckets wait. There is no sound of dripping. No cool breath rising from below. Beneath the silence, a memory stirs. Whispers tell us that this was once the heart of an empire that grew downward instead of outward, where other cities reached up with towers and walls. This one sank its roots into the ground, trusting more in water than in stone. It had no need for high monuments. Its power lay in these quiet circles, each one a promise that something unseen, something vital flowed below. We drift closer to one of the wells. Up close, the rim is worn smooth by countless touches. The stone is cool to the imaginary hand, even in the fading heat. Carved along its outer edge are faint, repeating symbols. Spirals folded into wave shapes, small star marks, lines like falling rain. Each groove is softened now, blurred by seasons of grit and wind, but their intention still lingers. At the very lip of the well, you peer down. There is only darkness, but in your mind, you descend. You follow a spiraling path carved into the inner wall, a stair so narrow and precise, it could only have been made by people who love this descent, who walked it often, who knew every curve. The steps bear the shallow hollows of feet worn long ago, the memory of countless ankles and heels pressing the stone. The air cools as you go. Sand falls away. Walls draw closer. For a time, there is only the sound of imagined breath and the faintest echo of your own descent, bouncing softly off rock. Then, far below, there is a widening. The tunnel opens into a chamber. In the city's living days, these chambers would have been filled with water. Pools cut into the bedrock, their surfaces dark and still, catching the trembling light of oil lamps. Columns rising from their depths like the trunks of submerged trees. voices kept low out of reverence, so that the ripples on the water's skin remained gentle and true. Here, deals were whispered. Grain was measured, journeys were planned, marriages agreed upon, everything flowed through the wells. In your mind, the chamber is full again. You hear the soft clink of clay jugs being filled, the rustle of cloth, the murmur of greetings in a language that has not been spoken for centuries. Above, the city's streets bend around these wells like petals or surround a flower. Narrow alleys lead into wider courtyards where people sit in shade, feeling the earth's coolness rise through the stone. It is said that maps of this city look like spirals drawn within circles. No straight avenue marches from gate to palace. No grand boulevard slices through its heart. Instead, the paths curve inward, always returning to water. The city is built not for display, but for proximity. No house too far from a well, no life entirely separate from the shared pulse below. They measured their wealth in depth rather than height. The wells were more than infrastructure. They were sacred calendars. Inscribed into their walls, just below the rim, were marks noting how high the water rose in certain seasons, how low it fell in others. These bands became records of years too dry, years merciful, years in which rain came early or late. Patterns were traced from them, patterns that guided when to sow, when to store, when to share. In one chamber, a narrow stone ledge runs along the wall. Upon it, in your mind's gentle reconstruction, rest tablets of clay and slivers of polished bone etched with small signs. These recorded not conquests or boundary lines, but the moods of the earth. How many days the wells sang in one year, how many in another, how swiftly a dropped pebble took to kiss the surface. History here was written in echoes and ripples. But then something began to shift. The marks on the well walls told a silent story. Year by year, the wet band crept lower. Rains grew timid, distant springs dried. The time it took for a dropped stone to meet the water lengthened, heartbeat by heartbeat, until one day there was no sound at all. The people of the city did not ignore this. How could they? Their lives were braided with these depths. They watched the lowering levels with careful eyes, listened to the changing voices of their wells, felt the air grow a little warmer in the chambers below. Some dug deeper, chipping away at stone that had never known touch. They followed the memory of old streams, chasing the whisper of moisture through the rock. New tunnels were carved, old ones were joined. For a while the water responded, returning with a shy trickle, then a thin flow. The city adjusted, tightened its patterns, learned to stretch each drop further. But there comes a point where stone itself says, no more. In the dim chambers, the pools grew smaller. The surfaces that once mirrored lamplight shrank to dark, quivering circles, then to damp patches, then to nothing but a cold sheen on the rock. The wells above became more silence than song. Some might have taken this as a sign to fight, to dam, to conquer, to drag water from unwilling depths. But the people of this place had always read the earth differently. To them, the wells were not just sources, they were voices. And the message in that receding water was not challenge, but farewell. So they did what perhaps only a city of wells could do. They listened. They accepted. The decision did not come in a single day, under a single proclamation. It unfolded like a slow spiral, curving through many seasons. Families began to leave. carrying with them their knowledge of carving, of watching, of listening. Some went toward distant rivers, some toward higher ground where the winds spoke of other patterns. They took seeds of hardy plants, principles of sharing, ways of marking time by shadow and star. Those who stayed behind did what they could to soften the city's parting from its wells. In some places, they lined the empty chambers with stones, making sure that when sand finally seeped in, it would not come in violent floods, but gentle, layered falls. In others, they smoothed the rims of the wells, as if tucking in a sleeping child. Some say they dropped offerings into the dry throats. Small figures, carved stones, bits of metal that had once adorned belts and braids. Tokens acknowledging the years of companionship. One by one, houses were emptied. One by one, doors were pulled shut. But the wells remained open. They did not cover them. They did not fill them. Perhaps they knew that these circles would outlive the city itself. And so, the city retired. Walls crumbled into themselves. Roofs collapsed inward. Courtyards became shallow hollows. Streets blurred into the plain. Wind carried sand over thresholds and through once careful doorways, flattening the shapes of domestic life. But the wells, anchored deep in the bedrock, stayed. The stones of their rims stood patiently, even as everything built around them faded and fell. The chambers below, now dry, held only echo. The air inside cooled further, no longer warmed by bodies and breath. Time drifted on. Travelers came and went, and what they saw was not a city broken by war or consumed by flame, but a ring of stone circles in an otherwise empty land. They called it by different names: the necklace of thirst, the eyes of the desert, the circle of forgotten springs. Some believed it was a monument to dead gods. Others thought it a place of punishment, a warning left by the earth. Few guessed that they were walking through the skeleton of a city that had once chosen to leave with grace. Now, in the present, you rise again from the dark chambers in your thoughts and find yourself back in the cool of evening. The sun has slipped below the horizon. A faint dusk sky blue clings to the western edge, fading into deepening purple. Stars begin to gather overhead one by one, like cautious witnesses. The wells, those round, patient mouths, no longer lead to water. They lead only to darkness. Yet they are not empty. Each one holds a circle of sky. You drift above the ring, looking down. In each well, the growing darkness frames a small, perfect mirror of the heavens. Where once people leaned over these rims to look for their own reflections in the water, now the wells gaze back at the stars. Where memory fades in stone, it is reborn in silence. The city of wells has become a city of sky windows. There is a quiet melancholy in this transformation, but also a strange beauty. The structures built to pull the world's life upward now serve to draw the endless night downward. Where once people measured depth with rope and weight, now you can imagine measuring infinity with a simple glance into a circular shadow. Perhaps this is what the city chose in the end, to trade the tangible certainty of water for the unbounded mystery of the stars. You watch as the night grows fuller. The last traces of the day's colors slip away. The wells darken, then begin to shine. In each, a tiny constellation appears. In one, the curved shape of a familiar cluster. In another, a scattering of bright points you do not know the names of. Each well holds its own small galaxy, framed by human stone and ancient effort. Around the ring, the land is quiet. No walls, no roofs, no haps. Only these circles, breathing in starlight. As you listen, the desert seems to exhale. The wells do not call out. They do not demand that their city be rebuilt or their chambers refilled. They have accepted their new Wasende, no longer feeding bodies, but nourishing a gentler awareness. A reminder that what is lost in one form may continue in another, quieter way. You may never stand at the edge of such a well in waking life, but you can carry the feeling of it with you. The sensation of leaning over a stone rim, expecting to see your own face reflected in water, and finding instead a clear, dark window into the stars. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some cities only reveal themselves when we are willing to see not what is there, but what once was, and what might be again in another shape. The city of wells no longer holds water. It holds memory. It holds sky. And as your own thoughts spiral slowly inward, like steps descending along a carved wall, you may feel that same gentle shift within yourself. From thirst to contemplation, from searching for something to drink, to simply resting your gaze in a quiet, reflecting circle of darkness. Above you, the stars keep their silent vigil. Below you, somewhere in the layers of your own mind, chambers of old feeling and forgotten understanding wait, cool and patient. For now, it is enough to know they are there. You close your eyes, the wells remain, each one a small round breath in the vast body of the desert. No longer drawing water from below, they draw sleep from above, inviting you to fall as gently into rest as their city once fell into sand. Softly, willingly, without a sound. The sun is low, a dim ember hovering near the horizon. Its light has softened from harsh white to a gentle clay red and gold. The heat that ruled the day is loosening its grip. The air moves more slowly now, as if tired. Out beyond the last scattered shrubs, the land levels into a pale, open plain. No walls, no houses, no ruins rising like broken teeth. Only wells. They stand in a wide ring, each one a round opening edged with stone. Some are lined with carefully cut blocks, their rims smoothed by hands long gone. Others are rougher, patched with smaller stones where time has taken its tax. None of them hold water. They are dark throats, dry and silent, set at strange intervals, as if marking the points of a forgotten constellation. From above, they look like beads of a necklace laid upon the earth. From the ground, they feel like questions. You glide slowly among them, your view circling the ring. Some wells are half filled with drifting sand, their depth hidden. Others drop into shadow so complete that even the shrinking light of the sun cannot touch the bottom. A few have stones, lodged partway down, tumbled from their own rims. No ropes hang. No buckets wait. There is no sound of dripping. No cool breath rising from below. Beneath the silence, a memory stirs. Whispers tell us that this was once the heart of an empire that grew downward instead of outward, where other cities reached up with towers and walls. This one sank its roots into the ground, trusting more in water than in stone. It had no need for high monuments. Its power lay in these quiet circles, each one a promise that something unseen, something vital flowed below. We drift closer to one of the wells. Up close, the rim is worn smooth by countless touches. The stone is cool to the imaginary hand, even in the fading heat. Carved along its outer edge are faint, repeating symbols. Spirals folded into wave shapes, small star marks, lines like falling rain. Each groove is softened now, blurred by seasons of grit and wind, but their intention still lingers. At the very lip of the well, you peer down. There is only darkness, but in your mind, you descend. You follow a spiraling path carved into the inner wall. A stair so narrow and precise, it could only have been made by people who love this descent, who walked it often, who knew every curve. The steps bear the shallow hollows of feet worn long ago, the memory of countless ankles and heels pressing the stone. The air cools as you go. Sand falls away. Walls draw closer. For a time, there is only the sound of imagined breath and the faintest echo of your own descent, bouncing softly off rock. Then, far below, there is a widening. The tunnel opens into a chamber. In the city's living days, these chambers would have been filled with water. Pools cut into the bedrock, their surfaces dark and still, catching the trembling light of oil lamps. Columns rising from their depths like the trunks of submerged trees. Voices kept low out of reverence, so that the ripples on the water's skin remained gentle and true. Here, deals were whispered. Grain was measured, journeys were planned, marriages agreed upon, everything flowed through the wells. In your mind, the chamber is full again. You hear the soft clink of clay jugs being filled, the rustle of cloth, the murmur of greetings in a language that has not been spoken for centuries. Above, the city's streets bend around these wells like petals or surround a flower. Narrow alleys lead into wider courtyards where people sit in shade, feeling the earth's coolness rise through the stone. It is said that maps of this city look like spirals drawn within circles. No straight avenue marches from gate to palace. No grand boulevard slices through its heart. Instead, the paths curve inward, always returning to water. The city is built not for display, but for proximity. No house too far from a well, no life entirely separate from the shared pulse below. They measured their wealth in depth rather than height. The wells were more than infrastructure. They were sacred calendars. Inscribed into their walls, just below the rim, were marks noting how high the water rose in certain seasons, how low it fell in others. These bands became records of years too dry, years merciful, years in which rain came early or late. Patterns were traced from them, patterns that guided when to sow, when to store, when to share. In one chamber, a narrow stone ledge runs along the wall. Upon it, in your mind's gentle reconstruction, rest tablets of clay and slivers of polished bone etched with small signs. These recorded not conquests or boundary lines, but the moods of the earth. How many days the wells sang in one year, how many in another, how swiftly a dropped pebble took to kiss the surface. History here was written in echoes and ripples. But then something began to shift. The marks on the well walls told a silent story. Year by year, the wet band crept lower. Rains grew timid, distant springs dried. The time it took for a dropped stone to meet the water lengthened, heartbeat by heartbeat, until one day there was no sound at all. The people of the city did not ignore this. How could they? Their lives were braided with these depths. They watched the lowering levels with careful eyes, listened to the changing voices of their wells, felt the air grow a little warmer in the chambers below. Some dug deeper, chipping away at stone that had never known touch. They followed the memory of old streams, chasing the whisper of moisture through the rock. New tunnels were carved, old ones were joined. For a while the water responded, returning with a shy trickle, then a thin flow. The city adjusted, tightened its patterns, learned to stretch each drop further. But there comes a point where stone itself says, no more. In the dim chambers, the pools grew smaller. The surfaces that once mirrored lamplight shrank to dark, quivering circles, then to damp patches, then to nothing but a cold sheen on the rock. The wells above became more silence than song. Some might have taken this as a sign to fight, to dam, to conquer, to drag water from unwilling depths. But the people of this place had always read the earth differently. To them, the wells were not just sources, they were voices. And the message in that receding water was not challenge, but farewell. So they did what perhaps only a city of wells could do. They listened. They accepted. The decision did not come in a single day, under a single proclamation. It unfolded like a slow spiral, curving through many seasons. Families began to leave, carrying with them their knowledge of carving, of watching, of listening. Some went toward distant rivers, some toward higher ground where the winds spoke of other patterns. They took seeds of hardy plants, principles of sharing, ways of marking time by shadow and star. Those who stayed behind did what they could to soften the city's parting from its wells. In some places, they lined the empty chambers with stones, making sure that when sand finally seeped in, it would not come in violent floods, but gentle, layered falls. In others, they smoothed the rims of the wells, as if tucking in a sleeping child. Some say they dropped offerings into the dry throats. Small figures, carved stones, bits of metal that had once adorned belts and braids. Tokens acknowledging the years of companionship. One by one, houses were emptied. One by one, doors were pulled shut. But the wells remained open. They did not cover them. They did not fill them. Perhaps they knew that these circles would outlive the city itself. And so, the city retired. Walls crumbled into themselves. Roofs collapsed inward. Courtyards became shallow hollows. Streets blurred into the plain. Wind carried sand over thresholds and through once careful doorways, flattening the shapes of domestic life. But the wells, anchored deep in the bedrock, stayed. The stones of their rims stood patiently, even as everything built around them faded and fell. The chambers below, now dry, held only echo. The air inside cooled further, no longer warmed by bodies and breath. Time drifted on. Travelers came and went, and what they saw was not a city broken by war or consumed by lame, but a ring of stone circles in an otherwise empty land. They called it by different names: the necklace of thirst, the eyes of the desert, the circle of forgotten springs. Some believed it was a monument to dead gods. Others thought it a place of punishment, a warning left by the earth. Few guessed that they were walking through the skeleton of a city that had once chosen to leave with grace. Now, in the present, you rise again from the dark chambers in your thoughts and find yourself back in the cool of evening. The sun has slipped below the horizon. A faint dusk sky blue clings to the western edge, fading into deepening purple. Stars begin to gather overhead one by one, like cautious witnesses. The wells, those round, patient mouths, no longer lead to water. They lead only to darkness. Yet they are not empty. Each one holds a circle of sky. You drift above the ring, looking down. In each well, the growing darkness frames a small, perfect mirror of the heavens. Where once people leaned over these rims to look for their own reflections in the water, now the wells gaze back at the stars. Where memory fades in stone, it is reborn in silence. The city of wells has become a city of sky windows. There is a quiet melancholy in this transformation, but also a strange beauty. The structures built to pull the world's life upward now serve to draw the endless night downward. Where once people measured depth with rope and weight, now you can imagine measuring infinity with a simple glance into a circular shadow. Perhaps this is what the city chose in the end, to trade the tangible certainty of water for the unbounded mystery of the stars. You watch as the night grows fuller. The last traces of the day's colors slip away. The wells darken, then begin to shine. In each, a tiny constellation appears. In one, the curved shape of a familiar cluster. In another, a scattering of bright points you do not know the names of. Each well holds its own small galaxy, framed by human stone and ancient effort. Around the ring, the land is quiet. No walls, no roofs, no haps. Only these circles, breathing in starlight. As you listen, the desert seems to exhale. The wells do not call out. They do not demand that their city be rebuilt or their chambers refilled. They have accepted their new wasende, no longer feeding bodies, but nourishing a gentler awareness. A reminder that what is lost in one form may continue in another, quieter way. You may never stand at the edge of such a well in waking life, but you can carry the feeling of it with you. The sensation of leaning over a stone rim, expecting to see your own face reflected in water, and finding instead a clear, dark window into the stars. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some cities only reveal themselves when we are willing to see not what is there, but what once was, and what might be again in another shape. The city of wells no longer holds water. It holds memory. It holds sky. And as your own thoughts spiral slowly inward, like steps descending along a carved wall, you may feel that same gentle shift within yourself. From thirst to contemplation, from searching for something to drink, to simply resting your gaze in a quiet, reflecting circle of darkness. Above you, the stars keep their silent vigil. Below you, somewhere in the layers of your own mind, chambers of old feeling and forgotten understanding wait, cool and patient. For now, it is enough to know they are there. You close your eyes, the wells remain, each one a small round breath in the vast body of the desert. No longer drawing water from below, they draw sleep from above, inviting you to fall as gently into rest as their city once fell into sand. Softly, willingly, without a sound. From a distance, it looks almost like a single creature, a string of shapes swaying in rhythm, bells chiming in slow, patient patterns. Dust rises behind it in a low, curling cloud, then falls again, leaving a faint trail that the evening wind will soon erase. You drift closer, gliding just above the ground until you can see the details. There is no road here now, no paving stones, no visible border between path and plain. The desert lies open in every direction, a woven fabric of ripples and shallow hollows. Yet the caravan follows a very precise line, invisible to the eye, but etched into habit, into memory, into the stories of those who led their parents and grandparents along the same way. Beneath the silence, that line deepens. Whispers tell us that once, where the caravan now walks, there was a road so well made it rang softly under wheels and hooves. A road of pale stone, laid in broad slabs, stretching like a careful thought from the edge of the desert into the heart of a city. We cannot see it now, but if you close your eyes and listen, it begins to rise. The image comes slowly, like an old drawing appearing underwater. Where there is now only sand, you see stone. Long, flat blocks, fitted together with loving precision, their joins so narrow that even the smallest seed could not slip between them. On either side of this stone river stand low walls, waist-high, guiding the flow of travelers. Here and there, wide side streets branch away, leading into neighborhoods of shaded courtyards and small, cool rooms. On this road, in an earlier time, there is another caravan. In your mind's eye, you watch it approach the city at dusk. Its pace is unhurried, but its purpose is clear. The day's heat steams gently off the stones. The air smells of animals and distant cooking fires, of dust and spices and the faint tang of metal. Under the arch of a gate, now buried and forgotten, the caravan passes from the open desert into the ordered embrace of the street. The stones remember the weight of each step. The walls remember the brush of each passing bundle and cloth. Day after day, year after year, caravans moved along this path. They carried grain and oil and cloth, yes, but also stories, tales of distant rivers, rumors of wars that never reached this quiet city, songs that changed slightly with each retelling. The road was not simply a conduit for goods. It was a vein through which the world's breath flowed in and out. You drift, hovering a little above that stone street, watching the life around it unfold. On one side, a row of stalls spills fragrant smoke and laughter into the air. Lamps are being lit one by one as twilight gathers, their flames small and bright against the dimming sky. Children run along the edge of the road, balancing on the low wall like tightrope walkers, their silhouettes briefly crossing the caravan's path, then disappearing into doorways. On the other side, a narrow channel, carved alongside the road, carries a trickle of water catching reflections of the first stars. Travelers pause to wash their hands and faces, to let their beasts drink, leaning on the low stone, feeling the day's dust leave their skin. This road is more than stone. It is rhythm. It is welcome. It is said that the city it served was never a place of great towers or blinding wealth. It was, instead, a knot in a quiet web of trade, a resting point where people could exchange not only goods, but come. Those who passed through were encouraged to leave with less fear than they brought, to carry forward a little of the city's slower heartbeat. But the world beyond the desert does not always move at the same pace. Seasons shift. Distances shrink and stretch in uneven ways. New routes open elsewhere. New cities rise with louder promises. The gentle knot in the web begins to loosen. Slowly, almost politely, caravans change their paths. The stone road sees fewer wheels, fewer hooves. The markets at its sides grow quieter. Lamps are lit earlier than not at all. Some stalls close and never reopen. Plays of shadow no longer draw their shapes across the road at the same times of day. The city, feeling the change, contracts around its own hearth. Those who once lived in houses facing the busy avenue move inward, toward wells and gardens that still pulse with daily life. The outer homes along the road grow empty, their doors left ajar, then shut. Dust settles in their thresholds. A soft film gathers on their shelves. Still, the road remains. Stones do not hurry. They do not assume. But the desert is patient. One year, a storm comes later than anyone expects. The wind arrives in low, insistent waves, each one carrying more sand than the last. The air thickens. The sky turns the chalky color of old bone. When the wind dies, a thin layer of sand lies across the road, gathered in lines and pockets that mimic the old traffic's flow. No one clears it. There are fewer hands now, fewer feet that care. Another storm comes, and another. Sand seeps into the cracks between stones, then blankets them slowly. The low walls on either side lose their sharp edges, their corners softening under repeated caresses of dust. The water channel dries, its carved edges filling with grit. What was once straight and purposeful begins to blur. The city pulls further back from the road, leaving it to the sky. In the end, when the last true caravan passes through, it does so more out of habit than necessity. The bells still ring. The steps still fall on stone. But even as they do, the path ahead is already changing. A new route forming in the minds of those leading the animals. One that will bypass this place. One that will save time here. One that will skip the old city's slow embrace. When those leaders return home, they will speak of the new way. The old stone road will be left to its own devices. Years pass, then decades. The city retires gently, folding itself closer to its wells, its inner courtyards. Some families leave, others stay, but no longer depend on the road that once fed them. The last of the houses along that avenue become shells. Their shutters hang loose or are taken for firewood. Rain, when it comes, pools briefly on their thresholds, then sinks into dust. The stones of the road feel each step less frequently. Then, not at all. Sand does not rush, but it is tireless. Layer by thin layer, it covers the stones. First knee-high, then higher, until only the peaks of the low guiding walls show through, like ribs of a buried creature. The road's surface becomes a memory held within the earth. We rise gently back into the present, into the soft evening where the living caravan moves. There is no visible road beneath it now, but the line remains. Not in stone, but in story. Those who walk at the front of the caravan have never seen the city. They have never trodden the paved street. But they were taught, as children, to follow this particular curve in the land, this particular spacing between two low hills, this particular distance from a long, flat rock that, long ago, might have been part of someone's wall. Walk here, they were told. The ground is kinder here. The winds know this way. Over time, the reasons become thinner, more symbolic than practical. But the habit persists. The caravan walks the same road twice. Once in its forgotten stone shape, once in this ghostly, sandy echo. You watch them now from above. Hooves and soft feet fall in a rhythm that feels familiar, though you have never walked there yourself. Dust billows gently, then sinks. The animals' necks sway. Their bells offer a slow chiming counterpoint to the whisper of wind. The path curves, invisible yet precise. as if following lines drawn in a book no one can open anymore. Beneath, somewhere under layers of sand, the old stones lie as they were laid. Perhaps their joins have widened. Perhaps some have shifted slightly under the pressure of the dunes. But the road is still there, a pale river of fitted slabs running beneath the caravan's progress. 2 journeys, one above the other, 2 times, layered without touching. It is said that sometimes, on certain evenings, when the air is especially still and the light just right, those who walk this way feel something strange at the soles of their feet, as if the ground briefly firms, then softens, as if they are stepping, for a heartbeat, on something more solid than sand. Most dismiss it as imagination, a trick of muscle and mind. But you, who have drifted between the layers, know otherwise. Where memory fades from the tongue, it lingers in the body of the earth. Where the city no longer stands in walls and roofs, it survives in the curve of a habitual route, in the way a caravan unconsciously leans toward an old line. The sun slips lower. The sky deepens into shades of violet and dusk sky blue. Far ahead, the caravan's path bends out of sight, swallowed by distance and shadow. The dust it raised settles back onto the unseen road, adding another fine layer to the city's long blanket. You hang there a moment longer, listening to the fading chime of bells, the diminishing rustle of steps. Then even those sounds are gone, and only the desert remains, quiet and wide. The road beneath and the path above share the same stillness. Perhaps you will never know the name of the city that once paved this way so carefully. Perhaps its language, its songs, its tastes and colors have dissolved entirely into the vastness of time. But the feeling remains. The sense that when you walk, anywhere, you might be walking upon other journeys, that the routes you follow may rest on older routes, gently hidden but never entirely erased. That your own steps become, in turn, part of some future layering as invisible and as persistent as the stones beneath this caravan. Some roads shout their presence with milestones and arches. Others whisper through the soles of your feet. The caravan that walked the same road twice does not know it is doing so. It simply follows the line it has been given, trusting the land, the stars, the wind. And you, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to loosen their grip, may feel that you too are following lines laid down by others long before you. Paths of kindness, paths of caution, paths of quiet retreat from harm. For tonight, it is enough to rest in that awareness, that you are held by patterns older than memory, that beneath whatever ground you stand on, there may lie the stones of someone else's careful choices, someone else's gentle passage through a difficult world. The desert sighs, the sky darkens, the road, both seen and unseen, falls silent, and you drift, little by little, into the soft, ancient space between one step and the next. The desert is quiet, not empty, never empty, but still. The day's heat has loosened its grip, and the air moves in slow, cool threads. Above, the sky is widening into evening, its hard blue softening at the edges, streaked with faint bands of clay red and gold. The first star is just beginning to show itself, shy and alone. Out on the plain, a single mound rises, not very high, not very steep, just a smooth, rounded shape, as if someone had placed their hand under the skin of the desert and lifted, gently, until the surface swelled. At first glance, it is nothing special. The dune seas you have seen are taller, the cliffs more dramatic. This hill seems almost modest. Its slopes are clothed in thin grass, where grass can find a way to live, and scattered with small stones. The wind draws delicate patterns along its sides, leaving faint ripples like frozen waves. But there is something about its outline. It curves too evenly, its shoulders too symmetrical. When the light touches it from the side, the way it casts its shadow looks less like a natural accident and more like the memory of walls folding inward. Whistles tell us that long before this hill came to rest, a palace stood here. Not a palace of glittering excess, but a place of cool order. Quiet courtyards, thoughtful halls, rooms arranged around water and light. We move closer, circling the mound as the sun sinks. On its western slope, small stones break through the skin of sand. Blocks with edges a little too straight, faces a little too flat. One bears a faint, chiseled line, the ghost of a spiral, worn down nearly to nothing. Another shows the remnant of a corner, an angle softened by years of wind. Beneath the silence, the old foundations stir. You close your eyes, and the hill dissolves. The sand falls away, streaming down like veils. The grass recedes, roots pulling free from whatever lies beneath. The curve flattens, the mound relaxes, and in its place, the palace rises in your mind. It is dawn in another age. The palace stands at the center of the city, not as a fortress, but as a kind of stone heart. Low walls, more graceful than defensive, encircle its outer courtyards. Inside, a series of open squares laid inward, each one smaller, each one quieter, until at last you reach a garden glowing in soft shade. Columns frame the walkways, simple, square, without grand ornament. Their capitals bear only faint carvings. Stars, small suns, spirals suggesting the turning of seasons. Between them, stretches of polished stone floor reflect the sky, catching the shapes of clouds and birds in passing. In one courtyard, shallow pools form a cross, aligned carefully with the path of the sun. At noon, light falls straight down into them, turning the water to white. At dawn and dusk, they glow in gold and violet, breathing color into the surrounding stone. The palace is not loud. It does not tower over the city. It settles into the land, as if the builders listened before they ever laid a block, asking where the earth might be most willing to bear such weight, where the winds might move most kindly around such walls. Inside, a cool hush rules the corridors. Underfoot, the stone is smooth but not slippery. The walls are whitewashed and left mostly plain, as if they understand that too much decoration can clutter thought. Here and there, a narrow band of color runs along a base, painted with repeating motifs. Lines like flowing water, small circles like seeds, delicate arcs like the curves of the moon. It is said that in its deepest rooms, far from the bright outer courts, the palace held maps not of land, but of time. In a chamber near its center, low tables are laid out with circles. Rings inside rings carved into stone, filled with marks representing floods, droughts, wars far beyond their borders, years of plenty, years of quiet. Priests and readers move their fingers along these circles, tracing patterns that return again and again to certain points, moments when the world shifts its weight. On the walls of that chamber, painted in soft, undemanding colors, are images of the palace itself, dissolving into green, then into sand, then into nothing but a rounded mound under the sky. An old story, perhaps, or a prophecy no one expected to see. Time, as always, loops. Years pass. They bring days of peace, days of tension, days of unremarkable routine. The palace hosts delegations from far lands, whispers agreements in its shaded corners, receives offerings, returns judgments. Life unfolds across its stones like a slow-moving tapestry. Then the patterns in the circles begin to close in. The wells at the edge of the city speak more often in low voices. The rivers in the distance forget their old paths. The sky holds its rain a little farther away each season. Caravans arrive with thinner loads, with news of unrest and hunger in places that once seemed stable. The palace listens. It is said that the rulers who lived here did not see themselves as separate from their building. They walked its halls at night with bare feet, feeling the coolness of the floor, the temperature of the air, the subtle shifts in echo from one season to another. They understood that stone has moods, that spaces remember. One night, perhaps in that chamber of circles, they lay their hands flat upon the carved rings of time and understood that their empire had reached one of those points the patterns warned about. They could cling. They could fortify. They could pour their shrinking resources into higher walls and deeper wells, into sharper weapons and stricter laws. Or they could do something else. Whispers tell us that the choice to let the palace become a hill was not a single dramatic moment, but a long series of small, quiet agreements. A decision that spread through the building like evening shadow, touching one stone at a time. It began with a closing. Certain outer rooms were emptied, slowly, carefully, not looted, not abandoned, but cleared. Scrolls were moved inward. Altars were dismantled with reverent hands. In one courtyard, a colonnade that once led to a reception hall was blocked with a low wall, turning a pathway into a boundary. Then came the filling. In chambers closest to the outer walls, clean sand was brought in. Not the harsh, cutting kind from outside, but finer, sifted grains, poured gently into places where the structure would otherwise one day collapse. In some rooms, low walls were built to hold the sand. In others, it was heaped carefully, smoothed with flat boards, as if making a bed for the building itself. Roofs were strengthened where they needed to bear the weight to come. In a few cases, beams were removed, not to weaken, but to guide the eventual settling, so that when stone descended, it would descend into support rather than fracture. The palace's own body was teaching itself how to lie down. Where memory fades for us, it sharpens for stone. The inner courtyards, closest to the heart, were left for last. There, life continued for a while as before. Water still danced in the shallow pools. Lamps were still lit at dusk. People still sat in the cool colonnades, speaking in low tones about distant politics and nearby harvests. But beneath their feet, plans had already been set in motion. Maps of time had been updated. The earth had been consulted. And when the day came, nobody knows which one it was, only that it must have come. Those who remained stepped back and let the palace do what it had been prepared to do. Perhaps there was a tremor. Perhaps just a long, slow sigh. Roofs sagged inward. Columns leaned, then came to rest against the sand their own walls had invited in. A hall became a tunnel. A courtyard became a layered bowl of stone and dust. The outermost edges of the building sank first, their outlines softening under fresh drifts. From above, nothing critical happened in an instant. No explosion. no plume of smoke. Just a gradual rounding as corners folded into curves. Year by year, the outline of the palace thickened. The highest points sloped. The inner gardens vanished beneath settled debris and wind-borne seeds. Dust, then soil, collected in sheltered hollows. Here and there, hardy plants took root. The building's sharp distinctions, wall versus yard, floor versus threshold, blurred into a single continuous shape. A shape we now call a hill. You return to the present, to the quiet evening, to the modest mound under the darkening sky. The palace has vanished from your inner vision. Only the hill remains, its skin touched by the first strands of starlight. You stand at its base in your mind, looking up. Somewhere under your imagined feet, columns are lying on their sides, embedded in sand that once rose to meet them. Staircases have become ridges in the earth. Doorways are compressed into layers. In one forgotten room, perhaps a mosaic still clings to a floor no one can reach. An image of something that once was considered important, now in absolute darkness, and yet not entirely gone. The palace did not fall. It lay down. It chose in its final act to become landscape. Perhaps this is why the hill feels the way it does. Not arbitrary, not wild, but composed. When the moon rises and brushes its flanks with silver, certain lines appear that echo the old architecture. A gentle depression here where a courtyard sank. A subtle shoulder there where a wall once ran. Standing stones at its foot like punctuation, the last visible words of a sentence that continues below. It is said that people from nearby villages come to this hill sometimes, not knowing its story, only that it is a place where the wind speaks differently. They sit on its slopes in the cool of evening, watching the light fade off the plain. Some say their thoughts grow quieter here, as if the ground beneath them absorbs noise, encourages gentler patterns. They do not know they are sitting on ceilings, on rafters turned to strata, on the backs of rooms that once heard decisions and dreams. Perhaps they do not need to know. Where memory fades in detail, it survives in feeling. You drift a little higher, looking down now on the hill as night settles fully. The stars have multiplied, Darlan, gathering in clusters, forming paths of their own across the sky. The hill sits in their faint, silvery glow, as calm and unremarkable as a sleeping animal. No sign, no pillar, no inscription marks it as anything special. And yet you know that once people stood inside it, walked its shaded halls, traced circles of time on its walls, and chose, at last, not to demand a different future, but to soften into the one they saw approaching. Perhaps the palace that chose to become a hill offers a kind of quiet guidance, that not every ending must be a clash, that retreat can be wise, even noble, that sometimes the greatest dignity lies not in standing tall to the last possible moment, but in bowing, gently, before the weight of what cannot be changed. As your own breath slows, as your thoughts begin to fold inward, you might feel some small part of you settling in the same way, letting certain sharp corners soften, letting certain rooms in your memory be filled with clean protective sand, allowing some stories to lie down, not broken, but complete. The hill rests, the stars turn, the desert breathes, and somewhere deep beneath that rounded silhouette, in stone that no longer expects to be seen, the palace keeps its silent promise to hold what it once was, to carry it gently into the shape of what it has become, and to watch, without complaint, as we pass above, thinking we are only walking on earth, when in truth, we are walking on someone else's carefully folded dreams. The day is already beginning to lean toward evening. The sun hangs low and slanting, its light no longer falling straight down, but pouring in from the side, like a secret whispered toward the horizon. The desert lies quiet under this softer fire. Dunes and flat stretches, scattered stones and low stubborn shrubs, all painted in sand beige and faint clay red. At first glance, the plain before you seems empty. A wide, flat breadth of earth, its surface rippled only by wind. You drift above it, your shadow long and thin on the ground below. Nothing moves, nothing calls. The air feels spacious, almost vacant. And then the light shifts. It is just a small change. The sun slipping one more degree, the angle of the rays bending a little differently. Shadows lengthen, stretching out like fingers. In this new light, what was invisible begins to reveal itself. Lines appear, long, shallow depressions in the desert floor, so slight that at noon they looked like nothing more than natural undulations. Now they gather themselves into patterns. Here, a straight channel of darker sand. There, a curve of stones, half buried, forming a gentle arc. Points that once seemed random begin to relate to one another, like notes on a staff of music. You slow, hovering lower. From this height, their design becomes unmistakable. The plain is not blank, it is drawn upon. Whispers tell us that an ancient empire, one that trusted the stars more than it trusted armies, built its greatest observatory, not as a tower reaching upward, but as a map pressed flat into the earth. You drift a little higher, just enough to see the whole expanse. At your feet, the desert becomes a chart. Thin lines, made of small stones and shallow trenches, trace shapes across the plain. Some radiate outward from a central point, like spokes from a wheel. Others loop, curve, and cross in routes that at first seem chaotic, then resolve into something familiar. If you've ever tilted your head back and traced the outlines of constellations in the night, beneath the silence, the sky is written here. There is a cluster of stones forming a crooked line with a small hook at one end. The memory of a pattern you might know as a hunter or a river or some other name in some other language. Nearby, 3 larger stones lie in a proud row, mirrored by 3 faint depressions a little distance away, as if marking the rise and fall of a belt in the heavens. Here and there, single stones stand alone, half sunk, like punctuation marks. Dots in a cosmic sentence pressed into the desert's grammar. It is said that at night, when the sky was clear and the air still, priests and sky watchers walked these lines by lamplight, pacing from stone to stone, learning to feel with their feet what their eyes saw above. They carried small lamps in their hands, and the tiny flames wandered along the ground like fallen stars. We sink now into their remembered time. The light fades softly into dusk. The last color drains from the horizon, replaced by a deepening blue. One by one, stars ignite overhead, each one sharp and cold. In the half-dark, the lines on the ground are no longer so easy to see with the eyes alone. But the bodies of those who know this place do not need sight. Bare feet touch the earth. The watchers move in slow, deliberate paths along the marked lines, following routes learned over many seasons. Every step corresponds to a point in the sky. They pause at certain stones, look upward, and whisper measurements to one another. Not in degrees or numbers, but in distances of breath, in lengths of time between heartbeats. In this empire, the sky is not a distant ceiling. It is a partner. Here, the map is not about land to be claimed. It is about balance. Along one line, drawn straight and sure, the watchers track the rising point of a particular star whose appearance once signaled the coming of the river's flood. In the earliest ages, when waters were generous, the star rose in perfect accord with the marks etched into their plan. But slowly, over generations, the rising point shifted, creeping along the horizon, arriving earlier or later, subtle but undeniable. The line in the desert records this. Small adjustments, a stone moved a hand's breadth here, a new marker placed further along there. What looks from above like a single unbroken stroke is, in truth, many layers of agreement between sky and earth. In another part of the map, a cluster of depressions marks the wandering path of a bright planet. Its unpredictable pauses and backward turns are traced as curves and loops that seem at odds with the straight lines of the fixed stars. This puzzled them, these ancient sky readers, and so they walked those loops over and over again, feeling the way regularity and irregularity braided together. Where memory fades in ink and parchment, it endures in paths walked countless times under a canopy of stars. The empire's neighbors might have seen this plain and thought it empty, or, at best, peculiar. There are no tall pillars here, no carved faces staring down from altitude, no proud towers writing their silhouettes in the sky. But those who belonged to this land knew otherwise. This was their observatory, their calendar, their teacher. Here they learned when to sow seeds, by watching not only the brightness of a star, but its position relative to these ground lines. Here they decided when to tighten belts, when to share grain between regions, when to call meetings of distant kin. The sky above and the sky below spoke together, and they listened in the space between. Of course, not all stories are kind. As years unfolded, foreign chronicles began to describe this empire in dismissive terms. They built no great monuments, some said. They left no tall stones, said others. Their lack of visible spectacle became, in the eyes of those who valued height and drama, a flaw. Primitive, small, unremarkable. These were the words written in far-off halls by those who did not kneel on this plain and feel the subtle power of its lines. Those who did not know that some of the finest instruments leave no shadow at noon. Whispers tell us that, in time, the empire itself grew quieter. Caravans shifted their routes, drawn to cities that glittered with obvious wealth. Droughts came in sequences predicted long ago in the circles carved elsewhere in the stone. The people who had walked the sky map since childhood scattered, carrying with them a sense of timing, of patience, of respect for unseen cycles, but leaving the plain behind. Without feet, without lamps, without voices, the map fell into disuse. Sand began its slow, equalizing work. Grains accumulated in the shallow trenches, smoothing their edges. Small stones were nudged out of place by wind and restless weather. In particularly harsh years, storm buried entire sections, only for milder seasons to uncover them again in fragments. The desert does not rush, but it does not forget its own nature. The map, meant always to be a conversation between sky and ground, shifted gradually into a monologue of sand. We return to the present, where you hover above the plain once more, watching as the light thins even further. The sun has dipped beneath the horizon now. The last of its glow lingers like a faint memory along the edge of the world. Stars multiply overhead. Down below, the lines are still visible in the afterlight. Faint, then fainter. For a moment, the reflection of the sky is nearly perfect. Bright points above, stone markers below, mirroring one another like a pair of open hands. Then the darkness deepens. The ground begins to lose its details. The marks blur into one another, then slip entirely into shadow. Soon, you can see only the stars above, stretching from horizon to horizon, their patterns, once again, belonging entirely to the air. Where memory fades on the ground, it remains overhead, unchanged. It is said that sometimes, after rare rains, when water briefly gathers in the shallow depressions of the map, the sky returns more vividly. Pools form where stars once were indicated. At night, those small puddles catch the actual starlight, doubling each point for a brief season. The desert floor becomes a scattered necklace of tiny trembling reflections. Most who pass will never see it. They will come in daylight, glance at the plain, and find nothing but sand and low features. They will hurry on, seeking the comfort of visible ruin. High walls, broken statues, stones arranged into obvious shapes of temples and fortresses. This map was never meant to shout. It whispers. As you float in the warm night air, the sky above fully awake now, you feel a quiet reverence for this kind of legacy, one that hides in plain sight, depending on the angle of light, on the patience of the gaze, on the willingness to accept that the most intricate structures may be those that cannot be possessed or photographed easily. The sky map hidden in the desert floor does not need to be rediscovered to fulfill its purpose. It already has. It taught those who walked it what they needed to know. It left its imprint in their choices, in their descendants, in the lingering customs of when to plant and when to rest. Perhaps its final lesson is for you, listening here in the dimness of your own room. Your life, too, is full of lines only visible at certain angles, patterns that emerge only when the light is low and your mind is quiet, connections between events and feelings, cycles that return in slightly different forms, constellations of memory you might walk across for years without recognizing, until one evening, suddenly, you do. Some maps are not drawn to lead you to treasure. They are drawn to show you where you already stand. As your breathing slows, imagine yourself stepping gently onto that plain, barefoot, under those stars. You put your foot down, and by chance you land on one of the old lines. You follow it, not because you can see it, but because something in your body leans that way. Above you, a star glows in the same direction. Below you, a faint, half-buried stone marker waits. You walk between them, held quietly by a pattern older than your worries. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in the way we usually think of discovery. Pinned down, measured, mapped again. Perhaps the sky map's purpose now is simply this: to exist as a story, a soft possibility, an image that returns to you when you look at a bare piece of ground and wonder what lies just under its surface. The night deepens. The stars look down. The desert lies still. And somewhere, beneath a thin skin of sand, The lines of an ancient map sleep in their own gentle geometry, no longer needing lamps or watchers, content to be one more quiet layer in the world's vast, unfolding design. As you drift, slowly, into your own constellation of dreams. The desert is restless when we arrive, not in rage, but in motion. The wind is awake, carrying long veils of dust across the plain. Sand moves in low, running waves that lick at the bases of dunes, smoothing their edges, erasing the faint traces of last night's tracks. The sky is a pale, muted yellow near the horizon, fading into a tired grey-blue above, as if the day itself has been rubbed thin. Through this shifting light, we begin to see a shape. At first, it appears only as a slight interruption in the undulating surface. A low, square shadow at the base of a dune, half buried, half free. As we drift closer, the wind shifts, brushing aside a thin sheet of sand, as if lifting the corner of a curtain. Underneath, stone. A flat roof, its edges softened, its surface scarred by centuries of grit. A wall that rises just high enough to be a statement, but not a boast. No towers, no statues, only a simple, stubborn rectangle of weathered stone, standing where the desert has clearly tread, many times, to erase it. Whispers tell us that storms have buried this place over and over again, piling dunes over its head until even its roof disappeared beneath the sand. But each time, the wind, in its endless wandering, has changed directions, carving and cutting until the top re-emerged, like a breath taken after a long pause, as if some quiet agreement exists between the temple and the desert. I will not flee, and you will not quite succeed. We circle the structure in our mind, feeling the grain of the wind against its surfaces. On one side, a narrow gap lies where sand has been pushed away from a low doorway. The entrance is no taller than a person. You would have to bow your head to pass through. Above it, carved into the lintel, are faint symbols. Not the bold figures of gods or kings, but small, concentric shapes, like ripples on water, like sound waves captured in stone. Beneath the silence, those ripples still seem to vibrate. It is said that this was the temple's purpose, not to host loud rituals or dramatic offerings, but to listen. You move closer to the doorway. The wind thins as you approach, as if reluctant to cross the threshold. Sand has dusted the entrance, forming a small lip you must step over. The stone underfoot is cool, even in the lingering heat. Inside, the light dims almost instantly, wrapping the first steps in a twilight of dust and shadow. You take those steps in your imagination, and the world changes. The wind's muttering falls silent. The constant hiss of sand is cut off. The air inside is still, dense, as though it has been holding itself in this shape for centuries. It feels thick enough to touch, like you could press your palm against it and leave a faint impression. The entrance passage is short, its walls close on either side, guiding you inward like a pair of cupped hands. The ceiling is low enough that you feel its presence above you, but high enough that you can move without stooping. The floor is smooth stone worn slightly in the center where many feet once passed, then not so many, then none at all. At the end of this passage, a wider space opens. The main chamber of the temple is not large, but it feels larger than it is. Its proportions are strange in a gentle way. Slightly longer than it is wide, its ceiling subtly curved, its corners rounded rather than sharp. There are no statues here. No altars piled with offerings. No vivid paintings jostling for attention. The room is almost empty. Almost. In the center of the chamber, a single square of stone lies inset into the floor. A slightly different color from the surrounding slabs, as if it has been polished by more than just feet. Around the walls, at about shoulder height, a shallow ledge runs unbroken, curving gently at the corners. Above that ledge, the upper walls are smooth and bare, rising to meet the rounded ceiling like the inside of a listening shell. You stand there in your mind, in that uncluttered space, and you notice something else. The sound. At first, you think there is none. Silence wraps the room like a cloak. No wind, no distant shouts, no animal calls, no drip of water, just a padded waiting hush. But if you linger, if you let your own inner noise settle, the room itself begins to speak. Not in words, but in a kind of careful echo. It is said that the temple was built after a drought, long ago, when the people of the surrounding lands realized that their usual ways of pleading with the sky had gone unanswered. They had shouted in their prayers, they had burned offerings, they had beaten drums. They had filled the air with sound in the hope of filling their wells with water. Nothing changed. So a group among them, priests perhaps, or dreamers, or simply those who had listened to too many failing rituals, decided to try another approach. They sought out a place where the earth itself seemed receptive. A slight hollow between dunes, where even in still weather the air seemed to swirl inward. They dug there, tested the ground, listened to the way their own voices bounced back from the walls of the pit. Finding something that felt right, they began to build. Not up, but in and around, shaping a room that would not broadcast their pleas, but catch them, hold them, and let them be heard as they truly were. The temple of silence was raised not to amplify sound, but to slow it down. The walls were shaped and smoothed to catch echoes and send them back gently, so that a single word could linger a moment longer, giving the speaker time to feel its weight. The ceiling was curved to soften any shout into a murmur. The stone square in the center of the floor was placed at the exact point where even the smallest exhale could be heard from every corner, if one was paying attention. In its first years, they say, people came here not to ask for miracles, but to lay down their own noise. A person troubled by anger would enter, stand on the central stone, and speak their fury aloud. The words would travel outward, touch the walls, and return to them altered, softened, slowed, stripped of their edge. That person would listen, and sometimes realize that beneath the anger lay something else. Grief or fear, or love unspoken. A person doubting a decision would come and whisper their dilemma into the room. The whisper would spiral out, touch the curve of the ceiling, and drift back like a breeze, fragile yet clear. In the act of hearing their own thought echoed, they might finally know what they had known all along. The temple did not answer. It reflected. In the height of the empire, when merchants grew wealthy and politics grew knotted, the loudest minds in the city would sometimes be humbled by the quiet here. Rulers would remove their jewelry, leave their retinues at the door, and step barefoot onto the central stone. They would speak not commands, but questions. What happens if we take more than the land can give? How much can we demand before the wells fall silent? Whom are we becoming when we stop listening? The room never told them what to do. It only allowed them to hear themselves more truly. But as with all things, time worked its changes. The desert climate grew harsher. The empire's neighbors grew more aggressive, more insistent. News of far-off wars reached the city, carried in the mouths of frightened travelers. Where once leaders sought the temple to consider, now they were pulled more often to war chambers, to dusty tables scattered with maps of borders and troop movements. The age of listening began to dim. Some still came to the temple, but fewer. Silence is hard to tolerate when fear grows loud. It is easier to shout than to sit. It is easier to build new walls than to hear how the earth shakes beneath the old ones. Years of sandstorms followed, hardening the land and hearts alike. One storm, they say, was fiercer than the rest. The sky darkened at noon. Winds screamed across the plains, carrying sand like knives. Dunes moved as if alive, their slopes collapsing and rising in panicked waves. When it was over, many familiar landmarks were gone. Among them, the temple. For a time it vanished entirely beneath the dunes. People searched for it, some out of devotion, others out of curiosity, others perhaps out of desperation. They walked where they thought it had been, sinking to their ankles in fresh drifts, their memories unreliable under the rearranged horizon. They dug a little, called softly at the sand, then gave up and moved on. The desert, it seemed, had swallowed the temple at last. But the wind is as changeable as breath. Seasons turned. In some years, the storms came from a slightly different direction. Instead of piling sand onto the hill where the temple slept, they shaved it off, carrying it farther afield. The desert reshaped itself, dunes migrating like tides. Slowly, the temple's roof reappeared. First, just a corner of the stone. Then more. Then the outline of the whole flat top, its edges worn and rounded, but unmistakably different from the surrounding sand. The doorway cleared. The carved ripples above it, though faint, caught the light of certain sunsets, glowing briefly before fading into darkness again. The desert had tried to bury it, yes, but it had also, in its restless nature, refused to hold that burial permanently. The temple of silence rose and sank with the shifting moods of the sand, always returning eventually to the surface. Now, in this quiet, lonely age, few come. Those who do find the chamber inside, much as it must have been long ago. Dust lies thick on the central stone. The ledge around the walls is coated with a fine, unbroken skin of sand, the record of years without visitors. The air is heavier, its stillness layered, but the proportions are unchanged. The curve of the ceiling still guides sound gently. The rounded corners still soften any thought that tries to bounce too sharply. Standing there in your mind, you can almost hear the memory of voices. Not the words themselves. Those have faded, but their shapes, sighs that once hovered in the center of the room, laughter that was quickly stifled, a single, startled gasp when someone realized that the quiet answer coming back to them was their own. Today, if someone were to bow and step inside, a wanderer, perhaps, seeking shelter from the wind, they might sit on the ledge and say nothing at all. Even that would be heard. The room would catch the tiny shifts of their breathing, the small creaks of their bones, the shuffle of their clothes, and return that sound to them as a reminder. You are here, you exist, Even when no one is listening out there, something is listening in here. Perhaps that is why the desert could not keep it buried. You drift out once more, through the narrow entrance, back into the fading light. The wind brushes your face. The sky has darkened into deeper blues and violets. A few bright stars hang above the flat roof of the temple, as if curious about what lies inside. From where you hover, the structure is small. The dunes around it are taller, more dramatic. The horizon is wide. The world could very easily step past this low square of stone and never know it is anything more than an odd rock formation. Yet now you know. You know that inside that unassuming shape is a room designed not for display, but for listening. A space where sound is not thrown outward, but folded inward and returned. A place where the world's endless noise can be laid down, even for a moment. Perhaps you do not have such a chamber in your own home, in your own city. Perhaps there is no carved stone, no central square, no carefully shaped ceiling to hold your words and give them back softened. But somewhere within you, there is a similar room. A quiet place that cannot be fully buried, no matter how many storms pass over it. Sometimes life piles sand over that inner temple. Tasks, worries, voices, expectations. For a while, it seems to vanish. You forget how to enter. You forget how to listen. You walk in circles on the surface of your days, thinking the silence is gone. But like the desert's wayward winds, time shifts. Something changes. A habit falls away. A conversation ends. A night comes when you are finally too tired to shout. And then, almost without trying, you find the doorway again. You step inside. You hear your own breath. You feel the room of yourself, listening back. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. Some temples only rise when the wind turns just so. The desert refused to swallow this one. Perhaps it knows we still need places that hold our questions without answering. That cradle our fears without feeding them. That allow our own words to soften and come home. As your eyes grow heavy and the edges of the waking world begin to blur, imagine resting for a while on that inner ledge. The outside noise drifts away. The stone beneath you is cool. The air around you is thick and gentle. Your thoughts, once sharp and frantic, move more slowly now, like sand settling after a storm. The temple of silence does not speak. It does not judge. It simply offers you back to yourself. Outside, the wind still wanders. The dunes still rise and fall. The stars still shine above the low, stubborn roof. And within, in the deepest quiet, you are finally free to fall, softly, into your own stillness. The sun is low when we begin, a tired coin resting just above the horizon. Its light spreads outward in a muted band of gold, turning the edges of distant dunes into glowing lines like the rim of a bowl. The air is cooling, but still warm enough that you feel it breathing against your skin. The sky is clearing its throat of the day, pale blue thinning at the top, a hint of a dusky blue deepening toward night. Before you lies a small rise of rock, not a grand cliff, not a towering outcrop, just a modest shoulder of stone pushing through the sand. Around its base, dunes gather like folds of cloth, pooling in soft curves. On its flanks, the rock is etched with faint lines and grooves, the work of wind and forgotten rains. You drift closer, drawn not by drama, but by something in the way the stone seems to lean forward, as if holding a story it is almost too tired to tell. On a ledge halfway up, there are marks. From a distance, they look like nothing more than random scratches. But as you come nearer, the pattern emerges. Lines crossing lines, small curves, repeating shapes. The traces of writing, an old script, its edges rounded by time, its inner spaces filled with grains of dust. Whispers tell us that this was once a hall of names. Not far from the city of Wells, near the road that walked itself into memory, there stood a simple building where stone walls carried the names of those who had lived and worked and wandered through the empire. Not just rulers and priests, not only generals and scribes, but potters and traders, healers and herdsmen, singers whose songs never reached the courts, children whose laughter never crossed into official chronicles. In that hall, the stone was divided into long, narrow bands. Along each band, names were carved in small, careful letters, each accompanied by a subtle symbol. A wave for those who watched water, a star for those who watched the sky, a spiral for those whose work circled through seasons. Farmers, keepers of grain, midwives. For a time, the hall was a place of quiet pride. People would come and run their fingers over the marks, feeling the joining of their brief lives to the larger body of the place. When someone died, their name might receive a small dot underneath, not as an end, but as a note that their story had passed into the invisible current beneath the visible world. But stories, like water, can be redirected. As years passed and powers shifted, there came rulers who preferred certain names over others. Names that spoke of conquest, of lineage, of triumph in battle. Names that supported the narrative they wished the future to hold. The Hall of Names, with its mixture of humble and grand, became inconvenient. It is said that the first erasure was hesitant. One day, a group of officials stood before a section of the wall where the names of those who had opposed a new tax were carved. Along with the modest marks of their lives, grain counters, caravan leaders, a teacher of young children whose lessons had encouraged too much questioning. Their names were still visited, still traced by the hands of friends and kin. A hand holding a chisel hovered over the first name for a long time. Then, with a single decisive stroke, the sharpness of the letters was broken. The work was not as dramatic as toppling statues or burning scrolls. It was small, almost delicate. The chisel scraped and tapped, carving grooves where grooves had been, but deeper, misaligned, making certain letters unreadable, certain symbols unrecognizable. The stone complied, giving up its clarity in thin, powdery curls. Those curls fell at the worker's feet, pale and weightless, scratched into dust. More names followed. In the weeks and months that came, other walls received similar attention. Those who had been inconvenient were thinned out. Those whose deeds did not fit the new narrative had their identities softened, blurred, removed. In some sections, entire bands were scraped down to bare stone, the faint ghosts of letters stretching across the surface, like shadows of things no longer allowed to stand in the light. The Hall of Names, once a place where stone grew richer with each carving, became a place where stone grew emptier with each pass of the chisel. And yet, something subtle happened along the way. The dust from each erasure did not vanish. The workers brushed it into small piles or at the base of the wall, streaks of pale powder against darker stone. Later, others swept those piles into shallow trays and carried them out, scattering them where they would not be noticed. A corner of a courtyard, the edge of a path, the base of the outcrop where you now float in your mind. The wind, that patient keeper of loose things, did the rest. It lifted the dust in small, invisible sighs, carrying it away grain by grain. Over days and nights, years and decades, that dust traveled. It caught on cloth and hair, lodged in the folds of tents, settled in the cracks of city walls. It drifted into wells mingling with the water, touching tongues that never knew they were tasting the ground-up remnants of forgotten names. Eventually, as the city thinned and the desert advanced, the dust departed those places as well, lifted once more into the high dry air and carried out over the dunes. Where memory fades from stone, it begins again in sand. Now you find yourself standing in your imagination on the crest of a dune. The wind is softer up here. It strokes the surface of the sand in long, slow gestures, lifting a thin skin of the grains and letting them fall again in delicate, gliding arcs. The dune's shape is always changing, yet somehow always itself. A subtle, moving architecture. You scoop up a handful of sand in thought alone, holding it up to the fading light. It looks uniform, fine grains, pale and shifting, slipping between your fingers. But if you could magnify it, if you could pause the motion and look closely at each tiny particle, you might see that some are smoother than others. Some are tinged with faint colors, iron red, chalk white, whisper of marble grey. Among them are the powdered remains of those erased letters, those chipped symbols, those painstakingly carved names. You cannot read them anymore. No single grain holds a whole identity. But together, they carry the residue of many lives folded into the desert's endless body. It is said that on certain nights, when the wind moves just so, the dunes sing. A low hum, a trembling, a vibration you feel more in your bones than in your ears. It happens when dry sand flows down the steep face of a dune in great quantities, each grain brushing against another at just the right speed, in just the right way, producing a tone that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some call it the desert's song. Others think of it as a warning. But there are those who believe that in that humming, the erased names find a new voice. Not as distinct nouns, not as clear syllables, but as a blended chorus. The sound of countless small selves, once carved and then ground away, now reunited in a single long note that rises and falls with the shifting slopes. As you stand on the dune, you can almost hear it. A faint, deep vibration, like a breath drawn in and held, then slowly let out. It shivers through the sand under your feet, travels up through your legs, rests in your chest. It is not a melody you can hum. It is not a word you can translate. But it touches something in you that recognizes what it feels like to have been and then to be gone. And yet not entirely gone. Beneath the silence, the nameless are still present. You turn, and the desert stretches around you. Waves of sand, scattered rock, the distant line of the horizon folding itself into the first blue of coming night. No hall of names stands. No carved walls gleam. Yet you sense that you are surrounded by more memory than any stone room could hold. Perhaps this is the empire's final act of inclusion. On the wall, only those chosen, or allowed, could have their names carved. There were always more people than places on the stone. But in the sand, everyone is equal. Those whose names were never carved. Those whose names were carved and then erased and and those whose names were never even spoken aloud in grand rooms, all are ground together, unseparated. The desert does not distinguish between dust from a king's title and dust from a potter's mark. Where the chisel was selective, the wind is generous. You settle down now onto the slope in your mind, feeling the sand give a little under your weight. It supports you and yields at the same time. If you shift, the grains adjust, flowing, filling, making room. Up close, the surface is not smooth at all. It is full of tiny peaks and valleys, minute ridges where one set of grains has come to rest against another. Light glances off them in countless micro-reflections, like a galaxy of quiet stars. You think of the Hall of Names, tethered to one place, its walls eventually standing in an empty city. You think of the chisel, the scraping, the dust falling. You think of those grains now, spread across 100 dunes, carried in the folds of storms, blown over travelers who never heard of the people whose ground-up names brush their skin. For a while no one knows, and it seems like forgetting. But then someone, somewhere, listening in the right way, hears the hum of a singing dune and feels it as more than a curiosity. They do not decode it. They do not write it down as notes on a page. They simply stand there until their own heart begins to beat in time with that low, steady vibration, and something quiet is restored. Not in the mind, which loves sharp details and clear accounts, but in the deeper, wordless parts of the self that understand connection without needing it spelled out. The sun has slipped away entirely now. The sky is thick with stars. The dunes lie vast and dark, their shapes barely visible in the faint, scattered light. If there is a wind song, it is softer, almost below hearing. The world feels held, paused. You may never see the place where the Hall of Names once stood. You may never touch the stone that carried, and then surrendered, those letters. You may never walk on a singing dune. But tonight, in this gentle corridor between waking and sleep, you can hold the image of a handful of sand and know that even what is erased leaves traces. Not all forgetting is absolute. Not all erasure is an ending. Some things are released from the narrow confines of line and symbol into a wider, more diffused kind of presence. So when you think of your own smallness, your own fear of vanishing, you might remember this: that there are ways of being remembered that do not rely on being carved into anything fixed. That the way you have moved through the world, the kindnesses, the questions, the quiet choices, may one day be ground down and scattered, but still present in the atmosphere of those who come after. Perhaps you will not be a name on a wall. Perhaps you will be a tone in someone's inner music, a softness in their decisions, a grain in the sand of their own becoming. The dunes settle, the night deepens, the desert breathes, and you, carrying now the story of names turned to dust and dust turned to song, are free to let go of today's sharp edges and drift, grain by grain, thought by thought, into the vast, gentle expanse of sleep. The desert is in its gentlest hour. The heat has unwound its tight fists and gone to rest beyond the horizon. What remains is a softness, warm but not harsh, like the last warmth in a stone that has held the sun all day and is now ready to give it back. Above you, the sky is enormous, a deep, spacious dusk sky blue sinking slowly into indigo, then into velvet black. Stars appear one by one, then all at once, gathering into slow rivers of light that flow from edge to edge. Beneath you, the sand is cool. If you imagine your bare feet pressing into it, the grains move aside, making room, then gently leaning back against your skin. They do not resist, they simply adjust, as they have adjusted to so many things. To winds, to rains, to hooves and wheels and footsteps that came before your own. From where you stand in your mind, the desert looks empty. No walls, no towering ruins, no broken statues thrusting up their tired faces. Only dunes and flats and quiet hollows. Only wind and starlight and silence. But you know better now, because we have walked here before, in stories. Somewhere beneath you is a city that chose to fold itself into sand, its streets still aligned with stars, its courtyards filled with a silence that is not absence, but rest. Somewhere nearby, beneath another curve of earth, a gate lies buried 3 times. By the desert, by story, and by forgetfulness, still holding the perfect bend of its once proud arch. Further along this invisible map, a ring of wells faces upward, no longer calling water from darkness, only cradling sky. Their dry throats still trace the shape of a city that grew around depth instead of height. There is a library that wrote its secrets on sheets of melted sand, then shattered itself rather than let its knowledge be turned into a weapon. Its fragments glitter now in depth that no one thinks to read. There is a road that once rang with the sound of wheels and voices, now a ghost under the caravan's new path, its stones resting beneath a thin skin of sand, remembering each step that passes above. There is a palace that prepared itself to become a hill, filling its own rooms with sand so it could lie down with dignity. Its ceilings now the earth you might sit on to watch the stars. There is a sky map still faintly traced in the plain, lines and markers that once taught people to move in rhythm with the heavens. Now half buried, half visible when the light slants just so. There is a temple of silence that the desert buries and reveals in turns. A low square of stone where sound learns to come home to itself, hiding in plain sight among taller, emptier dunes. And there is the dust, the sand that remembered the names, holding in its endless grains the powdered remains of letters once carved in stone. The names of those who lived, loved, worked, and vanished, now dissolved into a chorus that hums in the bones of singing dunes. You are standing now atop all of this, on the surface of a story that has learned to keep its voice low. Beneath the silence, an empire is still here. It is not waiting for archaeologists with brushes and tools, though they may come one day. It is not waiting for cameras or books or exhibits behind glass, though those too may arrive. It is waiting only in the way old things wait. Not impatiently, not hungrily, but simply existing, fully itself, whether anyone notices or not. You take a slow step forward in your imagination. Sand shifts under your heel, flows around your toe, remembers its own long journey. From mountains ground down over ages, from riverbeds dried, from stones once carved and then chipped away. Each grain has traveled farther than any caravan. Each grain has been part of many worlds. Your footprint appears, a shallow hollow in the starlit surface. For a moment, the ridge of your toes, the curve of your arch, the weight of your body are all written into the desert skin. Then a thin breath of wind curls through, blurring the edges, softening the imprint, beginning the work of erasing. And yet, just below that hollow, The city lies untouched. The gate holds its shape. The wells keep their circles. The library's melted glass glows in the dark. The palace breathes in the slow way stone breathes. The sky map's lines still trace patterns no eye can see tonight. The temple's chamber still waits, full of untouched echo. The desert hums with the names that have gone to dust. Where memory fades in one layer, it remains in another. We tend to think of history as something behind us, a straight line stretching backward into distance. But here, in this night, you begin to feel that it is also beneath you, stacked and folded, like blankets laid one atop another, each still warmed by the bodies that once rested there. The empire hidden in the sand is not a single thing. It is a tapestry of many choices. Some choices were loud, wars avoided, rituals changed, caravans redirected. Others were quieter, a library choosing to unwrite itself, a palace choosing to lie down, a city choosing not to scream as it sank. All of them are still here, in the patterns of the land. You lie back now in your mind, on the slope of a gentle dune. The sand supports you, adjusting its shape to yours, as if offering a bed made from the ground itself. You feel the coolness of it seeping through whatever separates you from it, soothing the heat and sharpness of the day. Above you, the stars move in their old slow dance. Perhaps they look very much as they did to those who once walked these buried streets and halls. Perhaps they watched the same constellations rise and set, traced the same river of light, made wishes or prayers or measurements by the same pale points. You are connected to them by this sky and by this ground. For a moment, let your thoughts drift downward, as if you were pouring them through the sand, letting them seep past the thin layer of your present concerns, deeper into the cool, hidden spaces. Your worries about tomorrow sit at the surface like loose grains, easily moved. Beneath them lie older worries, ball worn thin by being carried for so long. Deeper still are questions that do not need answers tonight, only room. Imagine those questions settling gently into the chambers of the hidden city, taking a place on its empty shelves, standing quietly in its silent courtyards, resting against its patient walls. The empire below knows something about carrying what cannot be fixed quickly. It knows how to hold stories unspoken. It knows how to let sharpness soften over time. It knows how to become less visible without becoming less real. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps that is what this hidden kingdom offers you. Not a set of facts, but a way of listening differently. A reminder that much of what matters in life happens below the surface, in the quiet arrangements of the heart, in the unspoken kindness, in the decision not to rise when you could, but to rest when you must. If you listen closely, beneath the faint hiss of the breeze, you might almost hear the layered life of this place, the murmur of water that once moved in channels under the wells, the soft tread of bare feet on polished stone, the crackle of furnaces transforming sand into glass, the steady rhythm of chisels carving names into pillars, the low, careful voices in the temple of silence, testing their own truths. Or maybe you hear only your own breath, going in and out. That is enough. You do not need to reach the buried city. You do not need to uncover the gate, or sip from the wells, or stand on the palace floor. It is enough for tonight to know that they are there. That under the thin skin of the world you touch each day, countless other worlds are resting, that beneath every road, another road sleeps, that under every ordinary hill, there may lie a carefully folded house, that under every desert, there may be a place where people once chose listening over shouting. An empire hidden in the sand is not asking to be rescued. It is not a puzzle waiting to be solved. It is a companion, a quiet reminder that endings can be gentle, that retreat can be dignified, that strength is not always loud, and that survival is sometimes a matter of changing shape, not clinging to one. As sleep draws closer, you might imagine the desert not as emptiness, but as a vast, patient archive. Each dune a page, each grain a letter, each buried wall a sentence in a language that speaks to the body more than the mind. You turn, just a little, on your imagined bed of sand. The stars blur at the edges of your vision, as if viewed through a veil. Your thoughts loosen, untying themselves from urgency. Above, the night continues. Below, the empire waits, unbothered by time. Perhaps, as you dream, you will walk its streets again, a visitor moving softly through rooms of stone and dust, reading nothing yet understanding everything you need to in the hush of that place. For now, let the knowledge of it cradle you, that beneath your feet, beneath your worries, beneath the passing noise of days, there is a deep, steady layer of the world that has already learned how to let go, how to be quiet, how to endure. An empire hidden in the sand, waiting quietly beneath all of our footsteps, as you, at last, let yourself rest.